The most challenging video game I had ever played as a kid was the joystick controller that had a game pre-installed. It was called Jack Spider-Man's Plug and Play, and was the greatest thing was ever created. It had me glued to the TV for a whole year, and before school I would wake up at least an hour earlier so I can get some screen time. And when I came home from school, I spent an unhealthy amount of time in front of the TV. I would sit super close to the TV for better immersion. Gaming is essential for today's culture because it allows people peace and escape from reality. When a person is fully engaged, it gives players a sense that they are in a completely different environment. Some people prefer drinking or recreational drugs, and some prefer sitting back and enjoying a couple hours of gaming. Gaming has come a long way in the past 15 years, with the developmental of very powerful consoles and PCs, the experimental technology of virtual reality that is quickly advancing and making its footprint in the gaming community. There is something for everyone in the community. It's just a user's preference. Everyone is accepted into the community. Gaming has a wide range of remarkable technology. One of the first ever controllers was the original Atari joystick. The Atari is such an iconic name in the industry. It is one of the gaming industry's forefathers. Alongside gaming mongrel Nintendo created a pad-like controller with directional touchpad and allows users to go up, down, right, and left. On the right side of the controller, it had A and B buttons, which were simple yet very effective. So many games were created for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and many games are a staple in many homes today. Mario Super Bros. Is such an iconic game that will always be remembered until the end of time. If you have not played Mario before, then you are not living. There is no better way to enjoy Mario Bros. Than playing on the original tiny controller pad with the A and B buttons, and the evolution of gaming is extraordinary. For example, the Sony PlayStation DualShock controller, which came out in 1994 for the original PlayStation console. The original first released DualShock controller had 4 buttons, an O, triangle, square, and X, 2 bumper buttons, and a directional pad. 20 years later, we now have a Sony DualSense controller that has dual analog control sticks that are clickable, 4 face buttons, touchpad that is similarly used like a laptop touchpad, PlayStation button, create button, and options button. Shoulder buttons, and built-in speaker and microphone to speak to other online players in interactive games. Technology in videos has evolved tremendously, so much like myself. I feel like I evolved with video games growing up. I've never paid much attention to things like graphics and frame rate. I did not even care about the bit size of a game. Back then, just like a book, you enjoyed a game for its story. It was about the context and quality of the creative process, and not just based on visuals. Some games have recently been released with very impressive gameplay mechanics and great stories like Red Dead Redemption 2, Black Myth Wukong, and Elden Ring. These are fan favorites, and you should try them if you have the opportunity to do so. These games have the potential to be more memorable, like the classics of God of War and Gears of War. With a solid fan base and very quality games, these games that I could start at 5 in the afternoon, place the controller down at 2 a.m. And these are the games that keep me going as a video game enthusiast. If you know anything about video games, you should know that Pong was the first ever created. Research shows that in the 1950s, Higginbotham created tennis for 2. He created this game as a fun diversion to show the power of technology. This is intended for the game to be a diversion. Just an example of the power of technology at the time. A decade later, a college student from the prestigious Massachusetts Institution of Technology created Space War. This was a 2-player game in which both players faced off in an intense dogfight, each controlling either of the wedge or the needle. That game included gravity effects and faster than lightning travel. Space War, being the second game ever created, was a revolutionary and well thought out. It was an early developed game without a specific budget, much like Pong. But War was more engaging and immersive, and space exploration was ahead of its time. Unfortunately, the game was not commercialized and was not widely available to the general public, primarily because Americans did not have a computer in their homes. Computers in this era were as large as an entire room and expensive. Only large businesses and institutions such as MIT had access to computers. It was not until the release of Space Invaders for arcade systems in 1978 it marked a new dawn for games. Space Invaders is still a massive success and is available at most arcades you visit today. You will most likely see a Pac-Man right next to Space Invaders games. Both these games were a must-play for every teenager in the 80s and are still iconic. There is no need to explain Pac-Man, everyone knows Pac-Man. These games are straightforward to understand and control. Pong and Space War were experimental games. The controller's Pong was as simple as having a dial control where the line went on each player's side of the screen. Space War was a little more complex, containing left and right toggle switch, an up and down toggle switch, and a nice red button with a labeled fire on it. As stated before, Space War was ahead of its time. Space Invaders was not more complex than Space War. Space Invaders just had a left and right joystick and a center button to shoot. Pac-Man had a directional joystick that went left and right, up and down. It was straightforward but very effective for its purpose. When you think of a joystick, you immediately think of Atari. The Atari joystick is iconic. The Atari joystick was popular because this simple design mimicked arcade cabinets of the era. And four directional joystick and the only one button and a little black stick established the directional standards we use in all consoles. People wanted the arcade at home without stepping outside or spending money at an arcade, bowling alley, or a pixel parlor. The joystick was super simple and it was preferred by people who enjoyed fighting games like Taken, Street Fighter, and Mortal Kombat. However, they used a more control panel with the joystick buttons like Atari joystick but with more buttons. The Nintendo Entertainment System, known as the NES, had a game-changing controller in the 80s. Nintendo released a gamepad controller that had a directional pad, also known as a D-pad, and an A and B button, straightforward and a joystick, but reconstructed to fit in both of your hands. Much more user-friendly and appealing to the average gamer. This was the origin of two-handed controller, and Nintendo created the Mario Bros. A huge success, the new pad controller had the perfect pairing for such a perfect game at the time, which created massive popularity for games and an even bigger gaming community. The NES was on everybody's wish list in the 80s. In 1994, when Sony created the first ever PlayStation, the controller was very advanced compared to the previous console controllers. The Sony DualShock controller had 4 face buttons, circle, triangle, and square, and X, 4 bumper buttons, and a D-pad. This allowed game developers to create more versatile games and even bigger and more complex community of gamers. Quickly, the engineers at Sony realized something was missing. And in 1997, they added 2 analog sticks. The left analog stick acted as a D-pad, but it fit better for 3-dimensional games. In the year 2000, PlayStation released the DualShock 2, a similar representation of our current controllers. Both analog sticks are now clickable. There were many games that people did not know that they were clickable. They were stuck on a game where it required to click the stick, but the game didn't directly say it. So they just put the game down and never played it again until they realized the buttons clicked. The clickable analog sticks were revolutionary and paved the way for other gamer companies to add this feature to their controllers. In 2005, the Microsoft released the infamous Xbox 360. This was the first console to have next-generation games with titles Gears of War, Fable, and Halo 3. These games have a solid fan base. Nothing else compares to Halo fans' loyalty. Xbox technology was advanced, but the controller was impressive. Microsoft created the first wireless Bluetooth controller. This was the first company to mass produce a completely wireless controller. 2 AA batteries powered the controller. You should have to attach the battery from the controller and reload them. Other companies would follow, obviously, like the competitors Sony and PlayStation, with the release of PlayStation 3, which was also released with a wireless controller. The Nintendo Wii was also released with a nunchuck controller, which is very different from everyone else. The nunchuck had features such as accelerometers, infrared cameras to track the remote's position and orientation in space. A multitude of motions like waving and pointing can be used to produce a variety of in-game effects. An underarm swing is used for bowling and Wii Sports, and it can be wielded like a sword in The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. In the recent years, virtual reality has become incredibly popular. Studies have shown that the sale of Oculus to Meta triggered a deluge of interest in VR, and soon other companies announced plans to release similar products. Some notable consumer products released or announced during this period include PlayStation VR, Facebook's line of Oculus and Quest headsets, and Apple Vision Pro. In 2021, Facebook was renamed Meta and announced that company would focus on developing technologies, games, and services for the metaverse, a connection of virtual reality worlds. This is a whole new level of gaming. The game library for the Oculus is not very large, but it continues to grow. The price for the device is pretty high, so consumers tend to lean towards buying a console instead of the VR equipment. It's just up to what the consumer is looking for. If you have not tried VR yet, it is worth trying, and it's very immersive. The graphics are also great for the headset. The gaming community and industry are very welcoming. There are controllers for people with disabilities. Both Xbox and PlayStation have adaptive controllers. The designs are complex and complicated to understand at first glance. A very impressive controller is called a quad stick. The device was created for people with quadriplegia, and it was created by a developer named Ken Yanklowitz. Ken stated, since 1981, I have made video games, mouth controllers, and related adaptive devices. My customers are children and adults of all ages. For most, it is one of the few things that they can do to be in an equal playing field with their friends. I have had technical help with referrals from many of my game manufacturers over the years. This device has been in the works since the 80s. It is no surprise that Yanklowitz has gone so far into the development that his device can be used to play modern video games, including people in the game industry is fast needed. People who could only move their heads want in on the fun of playing video games. I do not blame them. Playing video games helps people feel a sense of escapism. It allows people to express themselves through gaming. Whether playing video games gives them a sense of nostalgia or just an escape from reality. Growing up, I used to go to my local library to play video games on the computers. My favorite game that the library already had installed on the computer was Tony Hawk Underground 2. That is where I was introduced to Jackass and the world of skating. It is probably not the best for a middle schooler to play, but it was fun. This is also where I learned about PC gaming, but that's a different speech. In high school, my friend group was solely based on the common interest in video games. We would host LAN parties for all the new Call of Duty games since Call of Duty Black Ops 4. A LAN party is when you get multiple gaming consoles and televisions and wire them all together with an Ethernet cable, so we could all be on the same game. This was an incredible experience, and it may not be possible with future consoles since everything is now strictly digital. We would conduct tournaments that would last till the late hours of the night, sometimes until sunrise. These were core memories. We would invite all other people who enjoyed video games like us. And these LAN parties would sometimes turn into actual traditional parties with all kinds of people. Video games can be used to help people strengthen the function of their brains. Research says if you suffer from low self-esteem, reprogramming yourself through video games play may come to the rescue. A set of online games developed by McGill University psychologist Mark Baldwin helps the brain form more positive patterns of thought. Mark Baldwin is in the process of developing games that are specifically created to help people improve their cognitive health. Most video games are designed to stimulate the brain in many forms. Red Dead Redemption gives you a list of objectives to complete, whether it's reading a map or getting organized to do an action like train robbery. There's always something you have to think about before doing, similar to life. Sports games like Madden also make you use your brain to create strategies and quick reflexes to complete plays. The video game industry has come a long way since the release of Pong. Still, engineers, developers continue to work hard to create more immersive, robust technology to keep things fresh and attract more people to join the diverse community. Gaming will continue to evolve, especially with their tech, such as adaptive controllers like the Quad Stick, which is entirely controlled by the movement of the mouth. Everyone needs a break occasionally and should have a way to escape, and that outlet can be achieved through the art of gaming. With such a large, diverse community and the opportunity for technological advancement, gaming technology and the culture will never stop evolving. So grab a controller, sit back, relax, and join us for a game.